From the late 19th century to the early 1900s, immigration hit a pinnacle in American history. At this time, immigration stations and policies were being created and developed. Under it all, the Angel Island Immigration Station also made its way into that period, but its often untold and restrictive history has also left a stain. The Angel Island Immigration Station was a turning point for Asian migrants in the United States from 1910 to 1940. It not only fully enforced the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, but the negligence of the station and inhumane treatment of the immigrants also put the light on the discriminatory services. Located in the San Francisco Bay of California and close to the Golden Gate Bridge, Angel Island is the largest island off the shore. The island's history is long and has been used in multiple ways, including being fortified during the Civil War to defend against the Confederate soldiers in the Bay Area and declared a military reserve in 1850. A few decades later, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, which suspended Chinese workers and laborers of that time for a period of 10 years. This restrictive law was the first time that America had limited immigration based on nationality or race. This made it so immigrants can land in the United States without inspection and approval of officials. Such exclusion was originally administered in random ways, but soon many processes were enforced and implemented by a newly created national system called the Bureau of Immigration, which initially was just for regulating Asian immigration. It struck fear and hate within many migrants. With the storage at the Pacific Mail Steamship Company deck, which was previously used to process incoming and outgoing migrants becoming old, a new immigration station was appropriated by Congress using $250,000 as part of the same federal system on Angel Island. The Angel Island Immigration Station, or the AIIS, opened in 1910 with only 100 staff members to process and detain the new migrants who were pending results of medical and immigration inspections, and those being deported for holding against crimes and other sorts of fraudulent activity. Even though the AIIS was called the Ellis Island of the West, the intentions, goals, and treatments of the two had a drastic difference. For one, the United States was welcoming to the new European immigrants. The laws that restricted and controlled access on Ellis Island did not automatically exclude anyone, as the main goal was admission. Even though plentiful Ellis Island immigrants had physical and medical exams, as well as brief interviews, most stayed for only a few hours. Out of the 12 million arrivals on Ellis Island in 62 years, officials and inspectors only sent home less than 2%. On the other hand, the rather contrasting goal of Angel Island was to keep out the Chinese, and later on other immigrants from different parts of Asia as well.
They counted their detentions not in 1 to 2 days, but in weeks and months. The longest detention that we have found on record was 756 days.
On the AIIS, racial and gender segregation was also harshly enforced by the officers. This separated the whites or Europeans from other races and the Chinese from other Asians. After arriving migrants step inside the administration building after the segregation, they are instructed to take off their clothes by an American doctor. Immigrants then had to give stool samples and experience a humiliating medical examination. The length of an immigrant stay at the AIIS was often decided by nationality and class, which could be as short as a few days or multiple years. Europeans tended to have brief stays, as well as better conditions than other Asian detainees. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 slowed immigration, but did not outright stop it. Although 75% of the Chinese were excluded, the rest found a way to circumvent it, as the act still allowed merchants, diplomats, teachers, students, or those who claimed to have direct citizenship to be exempt classes to come to the U.S. A new opportunity came in 1906 when the San Francisco earthquake and fire that destroyed municipal records created an opening for Chinese residents and detainees to claim that they were born natively, or prove that they were U.S.
Still allowed
citizens.
to come. So my father did what many of the Chinese immigrants did to come to this country. He bought papers that said he was the son of a Chinese merchant in Stockton, California, who sponsored him to come because merchants could still send for their families. And so he bought these identification papers.
Soon, this strategy was countered, as now immigration inspectors performed harsh interrogations. An immigrant applicant would be called by a board of special inquiry, and over the span of hours or days, they would be asked about minuscule details. This was composed of their family history, the location of their homes, and their village. These types of questions were anticipated by some applicants who had already prepared for months, engraving every single detail to their memory. To counter such, witnesses, who were other family members who lived in the United States, would have to verify the information. Any differing answers from the verification process would either lengthen questioning or put the applicant at risk of deportation and possibly everyone in the connecting family. Due to visiting trips to China, the risk of immigration raids, and identity card verification on the street, those applicants often had to remember these tiny details for life. In addition to the grueling process, the living conditions of detainees were unsanitary and oppressive. Detainees lived in confined dormitories with bolted doors and barbed wire, making them unable to leave without an escort guard. Detention barracks were barren and filled with rows of metal bunk beds. Larger rooms were meant to house less than 60 people, but officials crammed 200 or more inside regardless. The shared toilet was a ditch filled with filth, and the coarse blankets made it hard to sleep in. In this environment, many took their own lives. The Chinese consistently challenged the constitutionality of the Chinese Exclusion Act and other laws, protesting the enforcement. Immigrants living in the men's detention barracks also had poems in their native languages that began to appear. Carved into the neglected and unfinished wooden walls with the ends of ink brushes they brought, the poetry expressed the immigrants' thoughts and frustration over their experience. Some Chinese men formed the 自助会, known as the Angel Island Liberty Association, who maintained order in the barracks. In the end, there were consequences to the negligence of the station, as complaints about the safety of the AIIS proved true when the administration building burned to the ground in August of 1940. Even with the station ending its run, the shadow of exclusion haunted the migrants and detainees for the rest of their lives. The widespread paper sun strategy and the protests of resilience during the anti-Chinese sentiments encouraged the U.S. government to increase their efforts in tracking, arresting, and deporting Asian, more commonly Chinese immigrants who violated the law.
But the most damaging effect was the psychological wounds that it inflicted on generations of Chinese Americans, that we are racial inferiors and second-class citizens.
This was seen as the first illegal immigration problem in the U.S., and Chinese immigrants were much more vulnerable to deportation than the other immigrant groups in the community. For many immigrants, detention on Angel Island represented the broader discrimination they faced on and beyond the island, always living under anxiety, harassment, and worry for personal safety. From its founding, the United States has benefited from the skills, ideas, and labor of the more than 500,000 immigrants processed and brought into this country. Though, for many, Angel Island was the first and last stop on a forced trip back home. The fear was passed through generations of those detainees, as many families carry on a double identity due to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the Paper Sons. To remember and honor the significant chapter in U.S. immigration and the detainees who were treated unjustly on Angel Island, in 2010, President Barack Obama proclaimed that January 21st was National Angel Island Day. America has a complex relation with immigration, welcoming the new arrivals while unfairly detaining and deporting immigrants based on their flawed policies, all written on those barracks and walls of Angel Island.